It is a reliable source. It's what they used to lock us up for January 6th. The same data. The same exact data.
Open your eyes to a new world that you never knew existed.
All right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to CannCon's Corner, the week in review. I promised you guys last episode I did here on Rumble that I would be doing this weekend update on it's normally going to be on Saturdays. I might do it on Sunday. I might even have to pre-record it Friday night. If something comes up, it's not going to be a guaranteed every single weekend show, but I'm going to try and stay consistent with this. So basically what this show is going to be, it's going to be about an hour long and just going to go through some of the major news stories from the week and give you guys just a recap on, basically the stuff I cover on Badlands Daily. So Monday through Friday, you can check me out at Badlands Media on Rumble, Badlands Daily every Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. Eastern. So there we go. One person, one vote. Sorry about Miami last night. That was brutal. That was brutal, man. Carson Beck just did not have a very good night last night. The Hurricanes went down to Louisville, or went down like they lost to them. Louisville actually came down here to Miami. So yeah, not a good night for the Miami Hurricanes, but it's okay. They'll be all right. All right, before we get started with the show, I do have a couple sponsors for this show. So mypillow.com, you guys are all familiar with MyPillow. I absolutely love them. You can get up to 60% off right now using promo code CannCon. Cannot recommend enough the slippers. You guys probably all think I'm like a broken record at this point. The slippers, but I use all their products. I have their bed sheets, I have their towels, I have their slippers, we have their pillows, I have their body pillow, I have their mattress topper, I have everything. MyPillow. Mike Lindell is an absolute patriot, and we got to do things to support patriotic companies, right? It's a employee-owned business, absolutely phenomenal business. Well, Mike Lindell owns it, but the employees have a stake in the business, all American-made products, and somebody that fights for what we believe in as America First Patriots. And so I will support a company like that every single time. Then we have another sponsor here, and the links, by the way, the links are down below, mypillow.com, promo code CannCon. And I've got a brand new sponsor right here that I'm excited about, Vibe Mushrooms. So you guys know CannCon stands for Cannabis Conservative, right? So all things organic, I'm all about it. I'll give everything a shot. And I've been taking mushrooms for several months now, a different brand, but I'm switching over now to use these for the psilocybin, because I'm going to microdose on psilocybin. And I'm looking forward to trying this, something I've been debating doing for a long time. Not debating, I was never opposed to it, just never had the opportunity to do it. And then I had somebody that we all know reach out to me and talk to me about this, and I was like, I'm all in. And so I've got my first shipment on the way over here. If you guys are interested, they are pure psilocybin that they use in their mushrooms. Some of them are going to give you, some of the effects, and some of them are just going to be for mind and focus. They've got I got these ones here coming, the Focus, microdose Focus organic mushrooms. And then I've also got a chocolate bar coming, and we'll try that out. So if you guys are interested, check out the link down below. You can use promo code CannCon, but if you click the link down below, I don't think you need to use promo code CannCon. So be sure to check that out as well and help out with the show. I'll have more on that as I get the mushrooms and start using them. I will be forthcoming with you guys and tell you exactly what I think of them. Okay. So on that note, let me just make sure there's not any crazy questions or anything. Doesn't look like it. You guys are going to have to turn on notifications to get notifications for the show. So let's start first and foremost with the biggest story, I believe the biggest story of the week. And that is, of course, that John Bolton was indicted on 18 counts. This has been covered quite a bit, so I'm not going to do too much on this. Again, I'm trying to keep this show condensed to an hour. John Bolton, 18 counts, individuals 1 and 2 sharing information, classified information. If you read through the indictment, which Alpha and I did on Thursday night sit rep, sending massive documents that, he tells us this was a diary, right? He kept a diary. We're talking 50 pages, 20 pages, 77 pages of information that he's sending off to his, what we believe to be his wife and daughter. It says individuals 1 and 2 are related to John Bolton. It does not explicitly say that it's his wife and daughter, but that's who it's presumed to be, his wife and daughter. He did turn himself in yesterday. So we haven't gotten that perp walk yet. Alpha and I were debating this on SitRep, saying that, the perp walk is going to be saved for somebody specific. And Alpha believes that it's going to be Obama. I personally believe that it might be Hillary. I've heard a couple other names thrown around there. Peter Strzok could potentially get that perp walk, although I think that would be wasted on him. I do think he will be one of the next people to be indicted, though. A lot of this is going on behind the scenes, right? We didn't really know Bolton was being investigated until the warrant. Comey, we kind of had an idea that Comey was being investigated after the 8647 incident. But yeah, we didn't necessarily know what was going on until it essentially happened, right? So John Bolton he's 76 years old. He's facing potentially the rest of his life in prison. Each count carries a 10-year maximum sentence. These documents, we don't necessarily know what they are, other than a general idea of, foreign country was doing this, and he shared that they're planning a missile attack and a missile test, and just normal intelligence stuff that is normally classified in the presidential daily briefing, that kind of thing. It's not stuff you're supposed to share. It doesn't matter if you're not actually sharing the document. If you're sharing the contents of what is inside of that document, you are technically breaking the law. And John Bolton's going to pay for this one. And a lot of us theorize, me and Alpha, again, we're hashing this out, thinking that perhaps they're trying to turn John Bolton state's witness and get him to cooperate. That's why him and Comey are some of the first to go. Both of them have family members that are mixed up in this. Not mixed up necessarily. We'll get into Comey here in a second, but Comey's daughter, Maureen Comey, was a prosecutor at the Southern District of New York, happened to get all of the desirable cases, right? She prosecuted the P. Diddy case and did an absolute disgraceful job on that, overcharged the crap out of that case, did not have control of the witnesses and the evidence, just not very well handled. And while P. Diddy, Sean Combs, I'm not going to call him P. Diddy, Sean Combs did get a 50-month sentence, it was well short of what potentially he could have faced. So it's ultimately a win for for Sean Combs in that case, but still not something that Comey should be proud of. She also, I believe she was also the prosecutor that was investigating Epstein, I believe. I believe. I might be mistaken on that. I'm trying to think of off the top of my head the other cases that Maureen Comey, I know she had some very prominent cases down there, and I can't think of them off the top of my head, but that's okay. That's okay. If you're interested, you can look up Maureen Comey to see, the other stuff that she's done. So, all right, so let's jump into this next story here, because this one is equally as important, because I think this is setting up the superseding indictments for James Comey. And this is from Just the News. Comey lawyer Patrick Fitzgerald linked to the Comey memo leak saga that prompted the Mueller appointment. So again, this is a very interesting story, because James Comey was arrested and indicted for lying to Congress, but this is something that's a little bit more serious than just lying to Congress. This is the sauce on that lie, what actually happened. And this article here is claiming that James Comey was working with his attorney, who's representing him now, but was also his attorney back in 2017, named Patrick Fitzgerald. And he was using Fitzgerald to disseminate information to another attorney that was working with him. I think his name was Daniel Richman. Let me make sure I'm getting this right. Yes, Daniel Richman, who's now a professor at Columbia University. He was working with Richman. So it went from Comey would send the leak memos to Fitzgerald. Fitzgerald would then send them to Richman, and Richman would distribute them to the New York Times, or fill in the New York Times on their content. And, the memos that were being leaked were private conversations that the president had with James Comey in his official capacity as the FBI director. And that is also going to be classified. That is going to be, a classified conversation, those memos. And again, so we have dissemination of classified information to the media. And in this case, it was specifically to get Robert Mueller appointed. And it says as much in the article here. Let's jump into this. If we jump down here a little bit, it says, James Comey, in fact, had authorized Person 3, which is Richmond, to serve as an anonymous source in news reports regarding the FBI investigation concerning Person 1. Now, we know that Person 1 is Hillary Clinton, and this is referring to the email investigation. The allegation that Person 3 is Richmond comes after it was suggested that the person in question was actually Andrew McCabe, which, by the way, former deputy director of the FBI. Andrew McCabe is another one that could be next up on the short list of people to be indicted, long list, I should say, of people to be indicted. He's on the short list of people to be indicted next, if I had to take a guess. At Comey's direction, records show Richmond spoke with the press to help shape news stories in Comey's favor. Richmond has said Comey never asked him to talk to the press. Richmond ostensibly was working at the FBI Office of General Counsel under then FBI General Counsel James Baker, and was coordinating with Baker and with then Comey Chief of Staff James Rybicki. This is probably my favorite part of this story. Not yet. Hold on. Comey was fired May 9th, 2017. Comey sends scanned copies. Horowitz, this is the Inspector General, found in his investigation into this, the Inspector General, quote, Comey sends scanned copies of memos 2, 4, 6, and 7 from his personal email account to the personal email account of his attorney, Patrick Fitzgerald. 3 days later, on May 17th, the watchdog said that, quote, Fitzgerald forwards these 4 memos to Comey's other attorneys, end quote, including Richmond. Fitzgerald also forwarded the email and attachments from his personal email to another email account that he owned. Fitzgerald then saved that PDF on his computer, after which he placed the incoming emails into the deleted items folder. So again, you're sending not only are you leaking private conversations with the President of the United States to the press, but you're doing all of this through private and personal email accounts, and not using the authorized accounts to send this information. That's a big no-no when you're dealing with classified information. Quote, Comey, that works too. Quote, Comey asks Richmond to share the contents, but not the memo itself, with a specific reporter for the New York Times. And that, quote, Comey's stated purpose is to cause the appointment of a special counsel. Now, this is the words of Inspector General Horowitz. This is not just the news, kind of assuming or embellishing or adding their own twist. This is straight from the Inspector General's report that came out a while back, years back. The New York Times published an article entitled Comey Memo Says Trump Asked Him to End the Flynn Investigation. And they published that on May 16th, 2017, which was the same day that they sent those memos. So that's a big deal right there. Now, this is the most fascinating part, and we talked about this on Daily, I think on Thursday. Peter Strzok told Horowitz that he was watching Comey's June 2017 testimony with several people, including James Baker and Rybicki. James Baker, Office of General Counsel, and Rybicki is Comey's Chief of Staff at the time. When Comey stated he gave a memo to a friend, quote, everybody in the room knew, oh, that's Richmond. Baker told the DOJ watchdog he remembered, quote, literally running down the hallway to his office, end quote, with Peter Strzok, finding Richmond's telephone number and getting, quote, Richmond on the phone right away, end quote. He introduced Strzok, then left. Baker said he introduced Strzok to Richmond, then left to call to watch the remainder of Comey's testimony. Strzok told the DOJ Inspector General that he asked Richmond to, quote, please preserve, end quote, anything that Comey had given him, and that he told Richmond that what he received from Comey might contain classified information. Horowitz said that Strzok's handwritten notes established that Strzok knew that all of Comey's attorneys had electronic copies of 4 memos. So once again, the Comey case, I think we're going to see the superseding indictments come down in this regard right here, that Peter Strzok has a lot more that he's going to have to face justice for, including whatever he did before the 2016 election when he told Lisa Page, "No, we'll make sure of it." That was his lover at the time, married. Both of them, I believe, were married, and they were having an affair, extramarital affair. And the infamous text message, right? He's not going to be president, right? Right? No, we'll make sure of it. So again, seditious conspiracy, bringing back the precedent that they set on the January 6th when they went after the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys and everybody else for allegedly orchestrating a coup, essentially, is what they were getting at. You have the same thing here, but here's the difference: is as an FBI agent, a supervisory special agent, I think he was a special supervisory. He might have been a SAG. I don't remember his exact title at the time, but Lisa Page also being in the FBI's legal office, a lawyer for the FBI, they had the means. It would be difficult, but they have the means to actually orchestrate something to subvert President Trump, to try and coup President Trump, to try and sway the election. That's where Crossfire Hurricane, the whole Russia thing comes from. So Strzok, I believe Strzok is kind of a slam dunk case. But again, low hanging fruit that could potentially turn into something to get the higher ups. And, he'll still hopefully serve some time if he's convicted. But again, this whole thing is unraveling. So I do expect superseding indictments for James Comey. I don't know, maybe in the next week or so. And this is, I think this article, let me just check. Okay, so this was done by Jerry Dunleavy, who writes a lot of, he co-authors a lot of articles with John Solomon. And again, John Solomon, for those that don't know, is kind of like the narrative deployment for this investigation into Russia, and the deep state. John Solomon has more experience on this with this stuff than just about anybody. So there you have it. Bolton indicted, and I am personally expecting superseding indictments from in the James Comey case. And I think we might see more co-conspirators named. I think Fitzgerald. I mean, how epic is that going to be if they name James Comey's current attorney representing him, if they name him as a co-defendant in this case, they charge him and indict him as a co-defendant. That's just going to be epic. I don't know that I've ever seen that before. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into the next story, another huge story from Just the News. And let's get this brought up here. Congress collected 30 million lines of phone data in the Trump J6 probe, raising civil liberty concerns. It says 30 million lines of phone data mapping, contacts between conservatives and the Trump White House in the name of investigating the J6 Capitol breach. The mountainous collection of phone records were revealed to the FBI, led by Chris Wray in late 2023 by Representative Adam Kinzinger. The cache was offered to the Bureau on the eve of the 2024 presidential election as evidence without requiring a warrant. According to the FBI memorializing document, Kinzinger told the FBI that the phone data had been collected by then Representative Denver Riggleman, an ex-Republican who was a staffer on the Capitol Riot Committee, and who later helped Hunter Biden's legal team to cast doubt on the laptop belonging to Joe Biden's son. So again, we're seeing a lot more come out now on the J6 front as well. We got the 30 million lines of data. Now, this is all encompassing. This is anybody that they decided that they wanted to track. This could be lay people, this could be congressmen, this could be senators. There's no limit to who these people could potentially be. We know that they tapped the White House switchboard, or at least they had access to it. It might have been granted by somebody, a mole in the White House, but they had this type of access. They were able to collect this type of data without a warrant. And, if you guys watched Daily yesterday, we covered a story that Speaker Mike Johnson is now considering legislation to thwart the abuse of power and collecting this type of information and doing these unwarranted, meaning without a warrant, not without justification, but these without a warrant doing these types of taps. But we had this opportunity when the 702 FISA was up in the continuing resolution to extend it. I think this was last year. I think this was still under the Biden administration. And you had certain Republicans that just, they love their spying, man. These neocons, they love their spying, and they love the ability for the intelligence agency to just wreak havoc over the people. And FISA courts are wildly being abused. This is something we talk about a lot on this on Badlands, or me and Ash talk about it. We covered it in Government Gangsters, and we talk about it whenever stories like this come up. But the FISA courts, which originated back in the 70s, I think it was the National Security Act of 1974, I think is where FISA courts originated, but they got a lot of power with the Patriot Act in 2001. And that power, or 2001? I think it passed in 2002, but anyways, following 9/11, I should say, following 9/11, they were able to then use FISA warrants to spy on American citizens. So FISA courts traditionally are for foreign intelligence surveillance, right? You're not allowed to spy on U.S. citizens. However, the Patriot Act, ultimately, if you have any sort of a connection to these foreigners, they can spy on you here in the United States. And that connection is very loose to make. I talk about this again all the time. I get emails all the time from companies, overseas companies. I never solicited these. I never asked for it. I never signed up for anything. I don't own a business in any of these markets and industries, but still I get these emails. Hey, do you want to buy oil from whatever? Do I know if they're spying on me? I don't know. I mean, they very well could be. I talk about some very controversial things, mainly election fraud, and it would not be beyond me that they would want to see that. But that's one of the ways in which they can gain this type of access, is and that email does not even have to be opened up. I had a conversation with a friend of mine that was in the FBI in the past, and he was talking to me about this and telling me how these FISA courts work, or these FISA warrants work, these surveillance, the degrees of which they're able to access your information, and it's downright shocking. But then we get that Speaker Johnson, I might propose legislation to cut back the surveillance for lawmakers. So again, just shit on the people, right? Just screw us, allow them to keep spying on us, but the second they start spying on you, we got to do something about this. We got to stop this. They can't be spying on us. That's only for you. It sickens me. These people sicken me, man. All right, again, we're almost halfway through, and I am not almost halfway through. So let's get into this story here. And we covered this one again over the week, but we did not cover the follow-up to this. This was from Politico, slap in the face, Mark Benioff's Trump turn stuns San Francisco. So Mark Benioff is the CEO of Salesforce. And Salesforce, he's a traditionally a lefty, right? He is the godfather of one of Gavin Newsom's children. So he's in the circle in San Francisco and in California. And he came out this week and said, I encourage the deployment of the National Guard in San Francisco to help bolster law enforcement activity, because we need more cops. We need more people to be patrolling. We need to clean this up. Very logic, level-headed. And then we got this story here from the Washington Examiner that I did not cover. So let's jump into this story, which might shed some light on why this took place. From Washington Examiner, Salesforce CEO who backed National Guard deployment previously funded protest industrial complex. So right now, as we speak, the No Kings protests are going on again throughout the country. I had a good friend of mine, Eli, over at Stuck in the Middle, called me up this morning and asked me if I wanted to go with him, but I was not able to go because I had promised that I would do this show. And I have another show coming up right after this. So if you're, and this is going to be a YouTube exclusive. So if you guys are watching on Rumble, go follow me over on YouTube, and I'm going to have Alpha Warrior on to tell his J6 story. And I think Eli is going to be joining me for that. So jump over to YouTube. It is going to be an exclusive. I'm going to do some exclusive shows on YouTube because I want to get it's all information that you guys can find on my Rumble, but I want to expose these types of stories to the YouTube crowd that might not have been following me for the last 4 years when I got kicked off. So I do want to include them, and I'm going to be doing a series of exclusive interviews and shows over on YouTube. Rumble is still going to be my home on everything, but all of these stories mostly exist already here on Rumble. So, okay. So on that note, in 2014, Benioff co-pioneered Pledge 1%, a corporate philanthropy model in which companies that take the pledge commit at least 1% of profits to charitable causes preferably with equitable aims. Equitable, that's that dangerous word, equitable. Pledge 1%, seeded by Benioff, acts as a corporate giving pipeline directing the flow of funds to social justice initiatives. Since its inception, Pledge 1% has generated more than $3 billion from over 19,000 participating companies around the world, with the goal of, quote, embedding social impact into the DNA of all businesses. Salesforce ultimately ceded control of Pledge's 1% infrastructure to the Tides Foundation, one of the largest left-wing grant-making operations in the U.S., responsible for funding agitation-style activism. That's the key right there, the Tides Foundation, because the Tides Foundation is, it's one of those leftist organizations. They're very polite here in saying left-leaning. They're full-blown leftist. My first experience with the Tides Foundation was doing my election research into Dominion voting, because Dominion shared a floor with the Tides Foundation in Canada at the Robertson building. They were the only two organizations, companies on that floor. So it was the Tides Foundation, Dominion, nobody else on this floor. And that I always found that very concerning. And so now we have evidence that Salesforce, the CEO of Salesforce, might have been involved in this. So I wonder if somebody is kind of maybe turning the screws a little bit on Benioff and saying, "Hey, we got you, man. We need your support, though. You want to help us out? Maybe we can forgive this, because they're going hard on this. Who's funding these protest industrial complex is what they call it here. So they're going hard, and I love it, man. I love it. So if this guy did actually flip on this, it's interesting. Reading on, Tides is a pass-through funder of left-of-center organizations. See, there it is, left-of-center. No, they're full-blown leftists. They're full-blown, communists. Well, I don't want to say communists, but because that's such a watered-down word at this point in time. They're full-blown disruptors. The pass-through funder of left-of-center organizations has financed various activist activities connected to political upheaval, including giving grants to pro-Palestine groups that stoked widespread chaos on college campuses in 2023. From 2022 to 2024, the Salesforce Foundation, the company's 501c3 offshoot, directly gave various Tides entities a total of $27.4 million in grant money. Those donations were earmarked for things like employment opportunities, general support, youth development, and solving homelessness. I love the youth development one, right? What is youth development? We'll go out there and protest and burn the police cars. And, these things, I mean, of course, they're not going to be the ones doing that. They're not going out there and telling people explicitly, burn this, do that. But they have, a handful of agitators. They get into the crowd, and they're the leaders, and they're the ones that push, the peer group in a certain direction, influence, agents of chaos, whatever you want to call them. And so, this is something that we're getting down to the bottom of. Look, you absolutely should have the right to protest in this country. But what we're seeing right now are well-orchestrated, well-funded, mutinous almost type protests that are quickly turning into riots, turning into destruction. We've seen death at some of these riots. We've seen, people that become radicalized from these types of protests, assuming that, if we're allowed to do this, we can push further. And then you get a guy on top of a roof shooting at an ICE facility and ironically only killing illegals, even though they're saying he was trying to kill ICE agents. He only killed illegals. That story still makes no sense to me. But that was a weird week, man. We had that guy doing the shooting. Then we had the Marine sniper, right? The former Marine sniper that was on a boat shooting people at a restaurant with a suppressed short-barreled AR-15. And then we also had the guy in the church in Michigan that drove into the Mormon church and shot, burned it down and shot a bunch of people inside. It's been a really weird go there. I want to show you guys something. So I talked about this on on the show, I think with Alpha. And I said, this guy, this sniper that went out there and did this, he wrote a book called Headshot: Betrayal of a Nation. And he made some very weird claims in some of his lawsuits. He filed a bunch of lawsuits and he made some very odd claims that just did not sit right with me. So I wanted to hear his whole story. So I'm going to be reading that book after I finish the book I'm reading right now. So, and it's a very short read. It's the words are very large. It's clearly written by a Marine. The words are very large. It's probably like 200 pages, and it probably could have been written in about 50 or 60 pages. So it won't be a very intense read. Okay. So there's the Salesforce. Now there was one other thing on Salesforce, and that will segue into the next, segment here. But Salesforce also, and I got to do some more digging on this now that this came up like this, but I'm going to go to Perplexity for this right here. Joe Hoft had an article up this weekend about Salesforce and made a very bold claim in there that I'd never heard before, and that is that Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger was trying to acquire Salesforce. Now, I don't know. I have not found any evidence that he actually did. And so I asked Perplexity, which I use all the time, Perplexity and Comment, for my AI large language model. I asked it what Raffensperger's association was with Salesforce, and he did not buy it, or at least there's no record of him buying it. So Brad Raffensperger, for those that don't know, he's very, 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 very wealthy. Very wealthy. He had I think a steel business or something like that, and he sold it for hundreds of millions of dollars. I think like $150 million or something crazy like that. So he does have. It wouldn't be beyond me that he could acquire a company like this. But what was really concerning about Salesforce is I'll just read this from the large language model. Raffensperger's association with Salesforce stems from his official role as Secretary of State, where he contracted the company to modernize the state's voter registration infrastructure. In January 2022, Raffensperger announced that Georgia had partnered with Salesforce to develop and host the new Georgia Registered Voter Information System, JARVIS. Steal that from Iron Man, which replaced the state's ElectionNet platform. Under the arrangement, Salesforce provided the cloud-based architecture and FedRAMP authorized secure servers for Jarvis, ensuring compliance with federal cybersecurity standards. The system stores Georgia's roughly 7.7 million voter records and handles early voting and absentee ballot processing. The implementation partner, MTX Group, designed the system's user interface and for state and local election officials. Raffensperger emphasized that Salesforce was chosen for its security capabilities and performance and its association with Tides Foundation. No, I'm just kidding. I added that, stating the new system would be, quote, faster, better, friendlier, and more secure. The $3.5 million system was financed through existing state bonds and the federal Help America Vote Act funds. Raffensperger's office continued to expand Salesforce use in other administrative systems. For instance, Georgia's professional licensing platform, Goals, is built on the Salesforce framework. So there's a lot of involvement with Salesforce in Georgia. And I don't know, how much further it goes beyond that, but the Washington Examiner article showing that they're involved in the funding of these protests. It's going to get spicy. And on that note, we'll jump into this story that I covered yesterday, I believe. New Georgia project shuts down, ending a decade of political influence in the state. So New Georgia Project is one of these leftist organizations, similar to like an Acorn type event organization, where, just organizing leftists, getting voter registrations, that kind of thing, the typical community organizing that we can call communism, because that's straight out of the Bolsheviks, right? The organization of groups and getting them together. Well, they're defunded now. They're gone by the wayside. And, I don't know where their funding came from, but, it was involved. Stacey Abrams and Raphael Warnock were involved heavily in the New Georgia Project. And Warnock, through my investigations into Act Blue and the smurfing and everything else, Warnock is a name that consistently comes up as one of the recipients of Act Blue funding. So I'm wondering if, this effort that President Trump is making to stop the private public partnerships between the government and these organizations, I'm wondering if this is where the funding loss comes from. Right? Are they losing their funding? I don't for a second believe that these organizations have billions and billions of dollars in grassroots funding. It's either coming from major corporations, the government itself, laundered through platforms like ActBlue and WinRed, and then dispersed down to these NGOs, these 501c3s and C4s that then disperse it out to organizations that have political agendas, and almost always on the left, although there is a 10 to 15% funding from breakdown that WinRed is funding quote unquote conservatives. Can't stand either organization there and cannot wait to see them all go by the wayside. So, all right, let's go ahead and I'm going to try something new. I think I can actually do ads now, maybe. And I apologize. I know that's not something that is, very sought after, but so this is crazy. Alpha was teaching me this. I have to run this on a separate computer down here. All right. I am not going to run an ad today. I'm going to get it streamlined a little bit so that I can so that I don't have to do it this way. I'm going to have maybe my laptop in front of me or something so that I can make it a little more manageable or a little more pleasurable for you guys, so you don't have to sit there and whatever. All right, let's jump into the story here. And I covered this on Friday. I got 20 minutes left. I'm going to go a little bit more in depth on what I think is going to happen in the next week or two, perhaps, maybe a little bit longer. Political opposition is not rebellion. Appeals court rejects Trump's rationale for troop deployment in Chicago. So this was the Seventh Circuit. So we have two competing court cases right now that are almost identical. We have the Ninth Circuit, which is hearing the case on President Trump's deployment of the National Guard to Portland, and also the California Guard, which has been federalized, deploying them to Portland. Excuse me. So you have two competing cases. And then obviously President Trump sent the Texas Guard at Governor Abbott's approval, with Governor Abbott's approval, to Chicago. And you've got a case in the Seventh Circuit in Chicago and a case in the Ninth Circuit in Portland, in Oregon. Both places, the district court judge, so the first level of the court, both cases, they issued temporary restraining orders stopping President Trump from being able to do this. The appeals court in the Ninth Circuit out west seems favorable to allowing President Trump to do this. The one in the Seventh Circuit does not seem favorable. In fact, they have stopped it at the appeals court level, at the appellate level. But I do want to cover this story here because, well, not story, just this quote. And I read this on Friday as well. Quote, and this is from the Ninth Circuit, Judge Ryan Nelson, who is a Trump appointee. Not that that should matter. I'm sort of trying to figure out how a district court of any nature is supposed to get in and question whether the president's assessment of executing the law is right or wrong. Okay. So what this judge is saying is that how are we as judges supposed to determine what the executive branch can do, and not like how they justify what they're doing. Okay. We often, talk about judges legislating from the bench because we have three separate branches of government: the judicial, the executive, and the legislative. Now, the legislative branch obviously writes laws, but when you have judges that try and legislate from the bench, they're basically inserting their own opinion and their own touch on the law. Like, for example, you remember in Pennsylvania during the 2020 election, just before the 2020 election, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, not the U.S. Supreme Court, but the Pennsylvania Supreme Court permitted the absentee ballots. I'm trying to remember if it was it's kind of a gray area in my brain right now. But the Pennsylvania Supreme Court ruled that universal mail-in balloting, I'm pretty sure was okay. And because they had to go through a process to amend the Constitution in Pennsylvania in order to allow universal mail-in balloting. And there's a process you have to go through. You have to have 2 votes in the legislative body, in the state legislative body, or the Commonwealth legislative body. And then from there, in between those 2 votes, you have to put it out in the paper for all the people to have a vote on. And then the people actually have to vote to amend the Constitution to allow that. And it was this whole big thing that they had to go through. Well, the judges basically said, well, they don't need to do all that. They're just going to change the law in this way, and ultimately did that. That's legislating from the bench. When you take a law and add something to it or take something away from it without just ruling it unconstitutional. And that's what they're doing now with the executive branch when they say that the president, hasn't defined what a rebellion is. He didn't define well enough what a rebellion is. Well, there's a lot of intelligence that the president is privy to that the judges are not in any way, shape, or form privy to. They get briefed every day from the Department of Homeland Security, the ICE, from Border Patrol, from the FBI, from ATF, from the DEA. He gets briefings every day from these people in his presidential daily brief. The judges do not. They have no idea what's going on in regards to this. So, as this moves on, I do want to highlight. Well, first, let's listen to President Trump here. This was from I think this was October 10th.
What?
The Insurrection Act, under what conditions or terms would you?
Well, I'd do it if it was necessary. So far, it hasn't been necessary, but we have an Insurrection Act for a reason. If I had to enact it, I'd do that. If people were being killed and courts were holding us up, or governors or mayors were holding us up, sure, I'd do that. I mean, I want to make sure that people aren't killed. We have to make sure that our cities are safe.
Okay, so that was President Trump. Let me get the exact date that this was published. October 6th, excuse me. So this was 2 weeks ago. I do think we're going to see the Insurrection Act declared in these states. And I think that Brennan Center does an excellent job at justifying it. And again, I'll tell you guys, Brennan Center is no friend to President Trump. But there are 2 sections that allow him to do it. Section 251 of the Insurrection Act and 251 requires state consent. So the state has to actually approve sending in the National Guard. But 252 and 253 allow the president to do it without a request from the National Guard. 253 has 2 parts. The first allows the president to use the military in a state to suppress, quote, any insurrection, domestic violence, unlawful combination, or conspiracy, end quote, that, quote, so hinders the execution of the laws, and that any portion of the state's inhabitants are deprived of any constitutional right, and state authorities are unable, and this is the key word, or unwilling to protect that right. Now, what do we see in Chicago? We see Brandon Johnson. We see J.B. Pritzker, the governor, the mayor of Chicago, Brandon Johnson, outright saying we are not going to allow ICE in. We are a sanctuary city, a sanctuary state. We are not going to allow the enforcement of federal law. The president's article, is it Article 4, Section 4, I think? Article 4, Section 4, his right to repel an invasion. Not his right, his promise, his authority, his mandate. The president is mandated by the Constitution to ensure that our borders are free from invasion. And Joe Biden just took a massive dump on that portion of the Constitution, and President Trump is writing that action. So justifying the Insurrection Act under those terms is 100% something that he can and should do if it arises to that level. He's trying to give them the out here. He's trying to do this civilly, peacefully, with their cooperation. But it doesn't look like that's going to happen. I think this could in some way be part of what the calling of the generals back to DC was, to Quantico. Could be. I don't know. Second part of Section 253 permits the president to deploy troops to suppress any insurrection, domestic violence, unlawful combination, or conspiracy in a state that opposes or obstructs the execution of the laws of the United States or impedes the course of justice under those laws. And 252 is essentially the same thing. Now, what makes this fascinating is this part right here. Nothing in the text of the Insurrection Act defines insurrection, rebellion, or domestic violence, or any of the other key terms used in setting forth the prerequisites for deployment. Absent statutory guidance, the Supreme Court decided early on that, quote, or that this question is for the president alone to decide. In 1827, Martin versus Mott, the court ruled that, quote, the authority to decide whether an exigency requiring the militia to be called out has arisen belongs exclusively to the president, and his decision is conclusive upon all other persons. Now, this is where the SCOTUS precedent in this case, this is where this is going to apply in Chicago and Portland in the 7th and 9th Circuit. Now, granted, he is not, as far as we know, he has not yet declared, invoked the Insurrection Act. Now, and this case does require that. So, to be perfectly fair, the judges haven't taken a step on this precedent yet, because this precedent deals specifically with the Insurrection Act. But what Judge Nelson, I think it was Judge Nelson, out in the 9th Circuit is saying is that you're still infringing on the executive branch's authorities here. And so, again, I think this is something that will get to SCOTUS and will get there pretty quickly. All right, so we got 13 minutes. So I'm going to do 2 more stories. Let me just real quick make sure that I get the best ones to do. That one we can get rid of. That one's all right, 3 stories. We'll go through these relatively quickly. All right, so this story here was an interesting story. This isn't a big story, but it's very interesting. From The Independent, mystery visitors, which, by the way, what a misnomer that is, The Independent. Mystery visitors plunged Ghislaine Maxwell's Texas prison camp into lockdown as inmates complain of preferential treatment. Basically, this is giving more fodder to the idea that Ghislaine Maxwell turned state's witness. She's getting preferential treatment. There's been, rumors that, people have asked President Trump, are you going to pardon Ghislaine Maxwell? I hope he doesn't. But I've said this many, many times. I'm often met with fierce pushback on this. If Ghislaine Maxwell, she's been in prison for a couple of years now. If her being commuted, not pardoned, commuted, she'll still be a sex offender, a felon, and all that stuff. But if her getting commuted unravels the entire Epstein scheme, I'd have to give that very serious thought and consideration. And I would probably lean towards doing it. And here's why. What Maxwell and Epstein did, personally, I believe, was a blackmail operation. And I believe that they didn't personally do it. However, to be fair, Maxwell, I think, was more invested than Epstein. I think Epstein was just a smart dumbass, right? He was just a useful idiot. Maxwell has, Robert Maxwell, her father was MI6, Mossad, a swampy guy. And Maxwell may have carried in the footsteps and was handling Epstein. The problem is the information that they have, that they've given, I don't think they personally have it. I don't think Epstein or Maxwell retained all of this information, although they may have had a backup somewhere that we'll never know, like a dead man switch kind of thing, which ironically was never pulled. But I think that the intelligence agencies that have that information are able to use that information to coerce and blackmail elected leaders, corporations, anybody that's powerful that they got their claws into. They now control them. And if putting Maxwell, if commuting the sentence of Maxwell exposes that, I got to say I'm pretty okay with that. And I know that's something controversial, and some people are like, no, everybody should be going to prison for it. If you got to let one pedophile out to arrest a absolute massive amount of not just pedophiles and sick, twisted individuals, but people that are pulling the strings for the United States of America and many other countries, you got to do it. You got to do it. And so that article right there just kind of lends more evidence to me that Maxwell is cooperating in some form or fashion. So, all right, let's jump into this story here. This is a fascinating story for me. Pete Hegseth has kicked out, well, not kicked out. I mean, they left on their own accord, right? A huge chunk of the media. Now, I didn't see an update on this if they've cowered and capitulated to Hegseth on this, but as it sits right now, I think OANN is the only network that signed this agreement that they're not going to have, carte blanche access to the Pentagon anymore. They're not going to be able to walk around anywhere they want to go in the Pentagon, one of the most classified buildings in the entire world. They're not going to just be able to wander into somebody's office and schmooze them and whatever the case might be. I implied that there may be, some less than legal favors that are given to people in these offices in order to get them comfortable enough to release classified information, which they then publish as a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend, that kind of thing. This is the CNN's reaction to this. I'm not going to play that. That clip's really long, and I played it on Thursday.
Reporters have been showing up at the Pentagon today and handing in their press passes. This is an extraordinary moment showing that the Pentagon is not changing, not backing away from this drastic, radical new policy. And the news outlets, the reporters, the editors, the media lawyers who said this is unacceptable, they're not changing their tune either. So all the major networks, all the major wire service and newspaper reporters who cover the Pentagon day in, day out are turning in their credentials. And essentially, as of tomorrow, you won't have those journalists able to work out of the Pentagon complex anymore.
Okay, so again, the meltdown that they're having over this in the mainstream is fascinating to me because, a lot of these outlets, we like to refer to them as Mockingbird media outlets because of Project Mockingbird and the intelligence influence that they have over these entities and the way that they're able to steer political policy simply by what they report, even if it's not factual, source of a source of a source, a source familiar with it, somebody that knows about the situation, somebody that's privy to the details, these kinds of things. I hate that so much, so much. If you are a public servant, the key word there is public. I feel like unless somebody is doing something and you want to be a whistleblower, right? If you want to be a whistleblower, then go about being a whistleblower. There's a process that you go through in order to do that. And I am all for that. I'm all for protecting whistleblowers, vetting their information and making sure that it's, factual. And I'm okay with the press being involved in that, by the way, as well. But we don't have whistleblowers. These people aren't blowing the whistle on things that are against the law, egregious violations. No, they're blowing the whistle on narratives. They're telling you about deployments to Ukraine, weapons going over to Ukraine. They're telling us about, Trump's inner thinking and just stupid stuff. And now that's going away. That's going away. We're going to get back to actual journalism where journalists actually report facts, where, people go on the record so that their credibility and their reputation is on the line with some of these things that they say. And if you say something illegal, if you leak classified information, then you're going to go up creek, up Schitt's Creek. Again, this one is kind of difficult for me because at the same time, I understand like a good journalist gets to the bottom of this stuff. And we do have a huge problem in our government with overclassification. There's no question about that whatsoever. That huge problem with overclassification. And so there are documents that get leaked that you're like, wow, why was that classified? Ash, my dear friend over on Badlands, when I covered her case, her lawsuit that she was being sued, we found out that they redacted, so it's not classified, but it's redacted. They redacted exculpatory evidence in her case. They redacted. And I'm not talking like, oh, maybe we could twist this and investigate it further. No, that statement that the person made was exculpatory. The whole case goes away if that wasn't redacted. The fact that it was investigated by local law enforcement and there was no crime there. There was nothing. They didn't do anything wrong. That entire section was redacted. So I understand that. And I don't think there should be redactions like that. I think that and overclassifications. But at the same time, these people are just walking around at will and doing whatever the hell they want to do inside of these agencies, inside the Pentagon, inside the White House, inside of all these places. And it's got to stop. It's got to stop. You got to have some accountability. All right, that is going to do it. I will say I did have a story on the Dominion Liberty vote that I was going to cover, but on Monday, I'm going to be joined by Professor David Clements and his wife Erin to talk about Be Pro, No Ink, and the progression to Dominion voting. Dominion was bought out by Liberty Vote. Scott Leyendecker, a former Missouri election official. I have no idea what to make of this. I'm like 90%. This is bad, but not in the sense that it got worse, although it could, it could be worse, but I'm not fully that far gone on this. I do think it's a bad thing. I think no matter what happens, machines will always be the worst thing in the world for elections, in my opinion, period. That's a hard stop. Doesn't matter who owns them. Doesn't matter who buys them. Doesn't matter if it's a Republican, a Democrat. President Trump could buy Dominion, and I would still say Dominion sucks and election machines need to go, period. So that is not a partisan issue for me. It should never be a partisan issue, and I will never let it be, in my opinion, in what I opine. I will never let it be a political issue in terms of partisanship. Okay. Wow. Good turnout over on Rumble. 370 people watching. Thank you guys all so much. I see Flying Storm gifted 5 subs. Thank you very much, man. That is awesome. That helps me out tremendously. You know, I just want to mention here, we are over on YouTube again. YouTube gave us my channel back. So if you want to follow me, I'm at CannCon Actual, just like it says down there in my handle. So go on YouTube, type in at the ampersand, at CannCon Actual. Give me a follow over there. In about 30 minutes, I will be going live with Alpha Warrior, and me and Alpha are going to talk about his J6 case, and share that out with people. Share that out on your normal social medias, like Facebook, like, you know, if you're on, well, I think that's just about the only normal one besides maybe YouTube, but share it out so that people can hear his story and see what actually took place during January 6th, not just in DC, but outside of DC as well. So be sure to tune into that about half an hour. And I'm going to try and get my friend Eli to join us. I don't know if he's going to be able to make it or not. He went to the No Kings protest to live stream that and document that. So I don't know if he's going to be able to make it, but I want him to be on there so we have a fresh perspective, somebody that doesn't know Alpha's story already, to ask questions that I may overlook in talking to him. So I'm looking forward to this. We'll talk about some general J6 stuff as well. What else? So yeah, follow me over on YouTube. I'm going to be doing some exclusives over there, rehashing stories that I've written for the Gateway Pundit over the years. And trying to get exposure out there. So I'm trying to grow that channel so that we can reach a brand new market of quote unquote normies over on YouTube that, you know, are just used to getting the same old culture war bullshit and don't know the deep down of what's actually going on in this country. Not that there aren't people over there that are covering it, but I think that we need broad opinions. We need a bunch of different opinions, a bunch of different, you know, ideas. And that's what I'm trying to do over there. So yesterday, I went through the Curling v. Raffensperger case and the J. Alex Halderman hacks in court. I went over that on YouTube yesterday, so check that out. Share all this out, guys. You guys are the best source of breaking the shadow bans. The more you guys share this out and we develop organic engagement, the more they're going to allow us the generic engagement, right? They're going to promote our stuff more and more and more. So I think this is all a big deal. I think it's all very important that we keep working at this. And I am very excited to be back on YouTube, even though a part of me is like, screw these people. They're evil. They're devils. They're demonic. They're communists. They're whatever. I feel that way. But at the same token, we're back there. And there's a bunch of people there that need to see the light. And we are here to do that. So again, thank you guys all so much for tuning in. I see all the usual suspects in there, Mags, New K's, Not That Girl. Good to see you guys. See some new faces that I might not have seen before. Halo Daisy, that's a new face for me. Let's see. D-Dale, see you there, brother. Good to see you. David's Dog Spa, there we go. Never seen that one before. So good. We're getting some new names in here. Love it, guys. All right. You can follow me on Twitter too or X, X, formerly Twitter, at CannCon Actual. And that's going to do it. I'll see you guys in about half an hour over on YouTube at CannCon Actual with Alpha Warrior and hopefully with Eli. All right. God bless, guys. Oh, wait. I forgot this is my platform. Stay frosty. God bless each and every one of you. God bless America. Make the fortune cookie country pay for this.
It is a reliable source. It's what they used to lock us up for January 6th. The same data. The same exact data